Some people look at a cat and feel something stir in their chest, a sharp, subtle irritation that has nothing to do with fur or claws. They don't recoil at the unpredictability of the animal because it is wild in the obvious way. They recoil because the cat refuses to be owned, refuses to kneel, refuses to obey. And when someone feels discomfort at a creature that is small, vulnerable, and utterly incapable of fighting back in any meaningful human way, that discomfort is rarely about the animal at all. It is about power, control, and the cracks in the soul that others refuse to see. A cat moves through the world like a ghost walking in the sunlight. It does not negotiate, it does not beg, it does not flatter. A person who needs the world to bend to their expectations will sense this immediately, and it terrifies them. Not the cat, but the reflection of their own rigidity. Cats expose the unspoken rules that humans with brittle egos try to enforce, that everyone must serve, that everyone must conform, that everyone must yield. When a person hates a cat, it is rarely about fur or noise or litter. It is about a subtle, simmering rage at something that cannot be contained. This rage is not born overnight. It is the accumulation of a lifetime of controlling impulses, often seeded in childhood. Perhaps there was a parent who demanded perfection, a sibling who needed constant approval, a teacher who punished curiosity. Perhaps it was the world itself, a society that rewards compliance and punishes individuality. The person learned early that the world is safe only when they dictate its terms. They internalized a principle that is easy to forget. If others do not conform, they are a threat. And cats, with their quiet indifference, trigger this ancient alarm. It is easy to see this pattern in small gestures. The disdain for stray animals, the irritation at anyone who questions rules, the fury at someone who refuses to compromise. These are not conscious decisions, they are micro-expressions of a mind structured around control. Psychologists call this an external locus of control, the belief that the world will only make sense if it bends to one's will. It is reinforced constantly in childhood, when obedience is praised and defiance punished, when empathy is conditional, and when emotional honesty is dangerous. The result is a mind trained to equate autonomy in others with threat, and independence in small creatures with betrayal. Cats, in particular, become symbols of everything that cannot be tamed. They do not respond to fear. They do not respond to punishment. They do not measure love in obedience. For someone whose sense of self depends on dominance, this is intolerable. Imagine a mirror that refuses to reflect the image you expect. Imagine every instinct screaming for submission and nothing bending. That mirror shatters patience, and what remains is often contempt disguised as dislike. This is why bad people, those who seek to control rather than connect, react to cats with hostility. It is projection, pure and simple. The cat has no agenda but survival and curiosity, yet it illuminates the dark corners of someone else's psyche. This is not a rare phenomenon. It is quiet, invisible, but widespread. Children who grow up in households with rigid hierarchies often carry the same pattern into adulthood. They are quick to label independence as insolence, autonomy as defiance. They see loyalty only in obedience, affection only in compliance. A cat does not obey. A cat does not need validation. A cat walks away from arguments it does not wish to entertain. For someone shaped by control, that is blasphemy. It is not just an annoyance, it is a threat to the architecture of their inner world. And yet, it is deeper than simple control. There is also the element of fear, a quiet, almost existential fear that someone or something might exist beyond their grasp. We all crave influence to some degree, but most of us temper it with understanding. We accept that other minds, other wills exist independently. People who hate cats struggle with this tolerance. They cannot bear the reminder that autonomy exists outside their command. A cat is not a puzzle to solve, it is a presence to respect. This presence forces recognition of limits, and that recognition is unbearable to someone who equates love, loyalty, or safety with submission. Think of it this way. The cat does not negotiate attention, does not perform affection, does not conform to schedules or moods. It is a quiet defiance wrapped in fur, and it refuses to apologize for it. For someone with controlling tendencies, this is more than a pet issue. It becomes a litmus test for their entire worldview. Every hiss, every ignored petting, every sudden retreat is interpreted as betrayal. The cat's very nature is a constant accusation. You are not omnipotent, you are not omniscient, and you are not in control. For someone whose identity depends on bending the world to their will, this is intolerable. There is also a cruel irony here. People who cannot bear the autonomy of a cat often justify their dislike with moral reasoning. Cats are selfish, cats are ungrateful, cats are bad companions. These statements sound reasonable, but they are armor, a shield against the uncomfortable truth that their own fear and anger are being reflected back at them. It is easier to pathologize the cat than to examine the fractures in one's own psyche. It is easier to say the cat is bad than to accept that someone's emotional architecture is built on domination and compliance rather than empathy and freedom. This interplay between control and contempt is not limited to animals. It bleeds into every human relationship, often silently. A person who cannot tolerate a cat's independence will struggle with independent partners, independent colleagues, independent children. Every act of autonomy is perceived as defiance. Every boundary is met with resistance. Every refusal is interpreted as a personal attack. And yet, it is not personal. It is a conditioned response, an echo from childhood, a survival mechanism that became a habit of perception. The truth is uncomfortable but simple. Bad people do not hate cats because of cats. They hate cats because cats refuse to validate their need for control. And in this hatred lies a quiet self-exposure. They are terrified of their own inability to accept that not everything exists to be owned, molded, or understood. Every swipe of a paw, every aloof glance, is a reminder that some beings live outside human ambition. And this reminder, instead of inspiring reflection, triggers anger. This is where the psychology of control becomes particularly insidious. It is not always overt. It is quiet, insidious, a whisper beneath the surface of everyday behavior, the subtle criticism of autonomy, the dismissal of freedom as irresponsibility, the covert efforts to bend others to one's will. All are rooted in the same mechanisms that produce the dislike, the irritation, and sometimes the cruelty toward cats. Understanding this is not about excusing cruelty. It is about seeing the pattern, naming it, and realizing how early experiences shape unconscious behaviors that ripple outward in every relationship. And there is another layer, one that is rarely spoken about. People who cannot tolerate cats often project their unmet needs onto them. They see independence and interpret it as emotional withholding. They see aloofness and interpret it as rejection. They see a lack of compliance and interpret it as betrayal. In reality, the cat is neither rejecting nor betraying, it simply is. It exists on its own terms. The person's anger is a lens, a distortion of perception rooted in unresolved trauma, fear, and the desire for dominion. So, when you observe someone hating a cat, what you are witnessing is a mirror of something far deeper, the invisible wounds of control, the early lessons that obedience equals love, the internalized terror of unpredictability, and the struggle to face autonomy in any form. It is a testament to how fragile control can make the mind. And yet, there is a hidden truth in this mirror, a truth that the person themselves may never articulate. Their anger toward the cat is a signal not of the cat's fault, but of the limits they place on themselves and others. This is the moment where many stop, and the pattern solidifies.
They do not pause to ask why the animal disturbs them. They do not reflect on their fear of imperfection or their discomfort with freedom. They label, they condemn, they externalize. And in doing so, they repeat a cycle that began long before the first hiss, long before the first aloof glance, long before the first moment of unbending autonomy revealed in the eyes of a small, indifferent creature. And it is here, at this very edge of awareness, that psychology becomes unavoidable. To truly understand why bad people hate cats, one must look inward first, past the obvious behaviors, past the justifications, into the subtle architecture of fear, control, and unresolved dependency. One must confront the reality that the discomfort is not caused by the cat, but by the inner landscape of rigidity, by a nervous system trained to demand submission, by a heart trained to mistake freedom for betrayal. And once that is seen, even faintly, the paradox becomes clear. The more someone resists the cat's autonomy, the more it illuminates their own need to dominate. It is a reflection they often cannot bear. It is a mirror they desperately try to shatter with words, gestures, and occasionally cruelty. And yet, the reflection remains, patient, quiet, unyielding, much like the cat itself. This is where the journey begins, not with condemnation, not with judgment, but with the recognition that autonomy, even in its smallest form, reveals truths about control that many are unwilling to face. And this is also where the possibility of understanding begins, if only one could pause long enough to look. And yet, the consequences of ignoring that reflection are subtle, slow, and corrosive. Someone who cannot tolerate a cat's independence often struggles to tolerate anything that cannot be controlled: friendships, romances, careers, even their own impulses. Every relationship becomes a negotiation for dominance rather than a dance of connection. Every disagreement becomes a test of obedience. Every act of free will outside their grasp becomes an irritation, a ripple that threatens the fragile architecture of a self built on compliance and control. Over time, this creates loneliness, not because others abandon them, but because the rigidity that shields them from discomfort also distances them from love. People who carry this need for control often do not realize how it shapes their inner life. The small, quiet irritations at autonomous beings become a lens through which every experience is filtered. They live in a world of micro-conflicts, constantly adjusting, correcting, demanding, and punishing, not out of malice, but from fear. Fear that if the world does not bend, it will expose their own vulnerabilities. Fear that freedom in others will highlight the absence of freedom within themselves. This fear is not always conscious, but it is relentless. It consumes empathy, dulls curiosity, and hardens the heart. But there is a shift possible, a subtle pivot that begins not with the other, but with the self. Recognizing the irritation toward a cat as a mirror rather than a threat is the first step. It is not easy because it requires seeing the cracks in one's own need for control without flinching. It requires admitting that discomfort with autonomy is not caused by chaos in the world, but by rigidity within. And it requires humility, the willingness to see that independence in others does not diminish one's worth, but rather teaches one how to coexist with difference. Reframing this discomfort changes everything. What was once contempt becomes curiosity. What was once irritation becomes observation. A cat's aloofness stops being an accusation and becomes a lesson in boundaries, patience, and respect. The same principles can be applied to humans. Autonomy in others is not a threat. It is a signal that the world is richer, more varied, and more alive than a mind confined by rigid rules can initially comprehend. Learning to sit with this discomfort, to allow space for independence without needing to dominate it, is a radical act of emotional growth. Practical steps follow naturally from this awareness. Begin by observing, not reacting. When a cat avoids your touch or ignores your voice, notice the response it provokes in you. Trace that irritation inward. Ask yourself what it is you are seeking control over and why. This exercise, repeated over time, retrains the nervous system. It strengthens tolerance, diminishes the reflex to dominate, and nurtures empathy. In human relationships, the same approach works. Pause before trying to correct, manipulate, or control. Respect boundaries, allow others their agency. The discomfort will remain at first, but it will soften, like sunlight breaking through frost. Emotional solutions are equally important. Journaling feelings of irritation or anger toward autonomy can help articulate the often unconscious patterns driving behavior. Therapy or guided reflection can uncover early experiences that seeded these patterns and provide tools to unlearn them. Meditation or mindfulness exercises create the capacity to sit with discomfort without reacting, and crucially, cultivating relationships with beings, human or animal, that operate on their own terms teaches that trust and respect do not require obedience. Autonomy can be safe, independence can be gentle, freedom can coexist with love. Healing does not erase the past, it does not make control impulses disappear overnight, but it transforms the lens through which the world is seen. The cat, once a mirror of rigidity, becomes a teacher. The aloof glance, once a trigger, becomes a reminder that life thrives in its own rhythm. And the internal landscape, once harsh and reactive, begins to soften. There is a liberation in acknowledging that the world does not belong to you, that not everything requires submission, and that some of the most profound connections emerge from mutual respect rather than dominance.